Fiscal Matters, a podcast of the Financial and Fiscal Commission.
Welcome to Fiscal Matters, a podcast of the Financial and Fiscal Commission. My name is Dr. Nombeko Mbava. I'm the chairperson of the Financial and Fiscal Commission. Today we are diving into the engine of South Africa's economic future. We are talking Project Vulindlela, Open the Way. And for those of you who might not know what is Vulindlela, it is a project jointly managed by the Presidency and National Treasury. The aim of Vulindlela is to fast forward key reforms in our economy to enable economic growth, to enable service delivery, and also to ensure that we have a capable state. So we're going to have a conversation as to where we are with this project, where are the successes, and where are the bottlenecks, the hurdles, and what needs to be done. And as usual, I'm not alone. I am accompanied by the research team of the Financial and Fiscal Commission. And of course, you do remember to follow us on X, on LinkedIn, and all other social networks. And so we are also greatly honored to have our guest of honor, Mr. He must call him Mr. So I'll call you Rudi. So Rudi is the head of the Project Management Office of the Project Vulindlela. And so he's going to be having a conversation with us, enlightening us, having an insightful conversation, and also enlightening you at home. And so I want to welcome Rudi to our podcast. It's a great pleasure to have you here today. And maybe as a start, just tell us, what is the core mission of Vulindlela?
I suppose when you started off by saying Vulindlela, which is, and many of us who are South African know this from Brenda Fassie, the late Brenda Fassie, where she sang this Vulindlela, which is normally associated with a wedding song or celebratory song. In this instance, it was about, and the sort of the broad meaning is opening up. In this instance, about opening up for the economy to grow. Yes. And that's the essence of it. What can we do differently to unlock economic growth, and what is in our control that we need to open up? And so when we started it, the essence was about economic growth, and still is. And that, of course, as we know, leads to job creation, right? Leads to investment. So opening up for network sectors. What can we do differently in electricity? What can we do differently in logistics and transport, telecommunications, water, visas, for example, local government, spatial inequality? And these are the kind of things that we sort of said it's important that we need to fix. Right? We've taken decisions on, as you know, Dr. Mbava, many years ago, sometimes decades ago, for example, 1998, white paper on electricity, never fully implemented. So it's about how we open up the economy using what's in our control so that we can spur growth, create jobs, and get investment growth.
So these are not new plans.
Not at
These
all.
are existing.
Absolutely. All of them are existing policy decisions. I can track back, like, for example, the decisions that we took about the unbundling of Eskom and the reform that we set on creating a competitive market for wholesale, or the electricity distribution. Those are all contained in the 1998 electricity white paper that is relevant today. And when we started the fundamental reform, you won't believe it, right? I mean, this is the thing, 1998, and you think the first sort of fundamental change we did was to allow for private generation in 2022, when we signed and changed Schedule 2 to allow for private generators not to be constrained by the cap. Remove that cap to 100 and then completely remove it. Importantly, not for own build, but to build so that you can transport your electrons on the transmission and distribution. That was fundamental. That's what was set out in that policy white paper. And so many years later, we're implementing that, establishing a wholesale electricity market for competition. We're going to do this year, next year. And a lot of them was actually enshrined in the Electricity Regulatory Act, which was now amended and was assented to by the President on the 1st of January 2025. And so these things are, the same for logistics. 2004, when we talked about the Ports Act.
Yeah.
And the fact that we talk about the unbundling or the separation of the Trust and National Port Authority to create competition in the port. There wasn't anything specific, but it was the sort of same line around opening up the rail network. Telecommunications, most basic thing. We were sitting on 4G and 5G spectrum that we needed to unlock and allow the private sector to use. We were fighting and arguing in government for 12 years around, do we do an open access or do we go for auctions? And we then decided, for goodness me, guys, let's just do the auction. Let's go to the market, get the spectrum out, let the telcos decide how they want to use it, and we did the auction. And I don't like to say that because it's not about making money. It's about how you create efficiency and below the cost of data. But we made 14 billion rand of simply just getting that out of visa reforms.
Yes.
Very much the same. Fundamental reforms around visa decisions that we took. About how do we, for example, attract critical skills in parts of our economy where we don't have those skills. And we know that skilled immigration is such an important part because, a skilled person that is brought in is able to do create 2 or 3 unskilled or semi-skilled additional jobs. We know from the data that that's quite an important part. We fundamentally overhaul this visa skills system. We've got a critical skills list that is continuously and iteratively updated. We've done a work visa system that is revolutionary. We've introduced a trusted employer scheme that allows employers to manage their intra-company visas. So these are if you've got a points-based system that we've been saying. Let's not sit in the back end as an official and decide on whether Dr. Mbava must come in. Let's look at what is critical and on the point scorer. Does she have a qualification which is required? Can she contribute to the economy? Is she able to look after herself and bring income? These are the things that globally sort of have set trends around how we attack that. But so absolutely, so I can go on and on, but these are things that have been set in policy. What we have not been good at, and I can sort of credibly say that because that's what the president so says, we've not been good at implementing it. So we've got to get it implemented. Sometimes these things are tough because, as you know, officials hold on to stuff because they think it's important to do it for them. Yeah. But in essence, what we want to do is make it easier for us to get investment and to unlock growth in these sectors that have traditionally been dominated by monopolies.
Yes. But from the last report now, which was tabled, the third quarter report, we can see that there has been some progress. Quite, impressive progress. I think we had about 47% of the activities which are on track.
Yeah.
But obviously, there are still some which are facing some bottlenecks.
Absolutely.
So where are those bottlenecks and what needs to be done?
There are 3 bottlenecks in the last quarter report. I would slightly boast a little bit more on there are 2 greens, right? So we've got this fun color coding. So allow you to explain. There were 40% that is, 47% that is on track that is not behind, and then there's another 40% that is also on track but slightly behind. So it's probably 87% that is sort of moving along. That shows a green, and I think that's an important part. 3 areas that are sort of areas where we are concerned about is the reform in the electricity sector, particularly for us to be able to ensure that we do reach a logical conclusion of creating a competitive electricity exports. And that does require for us to make fundamental changes of how we think about Eskom, and how we manage the market. And that's quite important. We've got to create a level playing field. There are many private operators that are coming in that have invested because of the decisions. They want to participate in the wholesale electricity market. They want to sell it to an entity that they know is independent and purchase electrons that they'll sell to all of us on a market space, and that they don't favor an incumbent or anyone. They want to make sure that they can have access, that where there is going to be investment in grid, that the investment in grid is not for one incumbent, but for all of us. So this is an important part of creating that. The second area, also in the electricity sector, is fundamentally, which I think you guys have written quite a bit about, is the massive risk around electricity distribution sector and the non-payment of electricity by municipalities or utilities in those industries. And that for us is quite important. We've got to overhaul and fundamentally change some of the aspects and the broader thinking around that. And we've developed a roadmap, and we think it's going to be quite important for us to be able to ensure that we move along in a way that's dealt with the wholesale market, that we've got to now deal with the distribution market as well. And the distribution market is very complex for many reasons. Number one, it's split between Eskom, which controls 40% of the distribution space, and the rest is split up between 167 utilities. Many of them, by far the vast majority, do not comply with the licensing conditions. And many of them don't have the capacity or scale to be able to run a distribution sector. So you got to think quite carefully of how do we deal with this? How do we make sure, number one, that they provide services, and they continue to provide electricity, and number two, that they pay their accounts.
Yes.
And they got to get customers to pay. So those are important parts of it. And that's the one. The third area is the complex one that we've chosen, which is in phase 2, Dr. Ndava, is the spatial inequality and the issues around title deeds. We are running into problems in getting the title deeds matter sorted out, because we know that title deeds has economic spin-off. Once you have ownership of an asset, you have security. You are able to use that asset in any particular way to secure either investments or borrowing or anything else that is important. Giving only South African citizens who have stayed in houses and don't have a title, I think it's quite an important part. But we're working with the Department of Human Settlements around unblocking the title deeds. It's quite an important part. It's a fundamental exercise that we are able to give the sort of asset ownership to people that are able to use an asset in a way that is more productive and was able to expand the sort of income, let's say. Those are the three areas, and we'll work along with the departments to be able to ensure that we do see the job.
Yeah. So Sabira, I know you have some questions, some thoughts or insights that you wanted to just ask Rudi.
Yes. Rudi, you mentioned a lot of, in fact, your response was around the importance of reforms. You spoke about reforms across various sectors, across different levels of government, and departments that should play a role to ensure that what is intended is delivered. So one of the issues of the aspect that is in the document that you have identified as one of the area that needs to be focused on, to be attended in local governments, to identify or to develop the standardization and the professionalization in the appointments of officials in local government sector. How important is this? And then where are you in the process in attaining this?
Absolutely. That is fundamental, because we've done some of it already. I'm not sure whether the FFC is covered by the professionalization framework at the your commission. So you have different sets. But we are covered by a professionalization framework, which is run by the Public Service Commission, PSC. Professor Samadoda Fakini runs that, and that's quite an important part of that. But it's not, as it stands right now, it's not cascaded down to local government officials. And remember, the idea of the Public Service Commission about professionalization is that I, as a bureaucrat, have an opportunity to progress in the hierarchy of the public service. I'm protected from outside political influence. My ability to skill myself, my ability to be able to earn my income and do stuff in a professional manner. And unfortunately, at the local government level, which is at the coalface, that is so robust, political interference, decisions that are taken that are not in the best interest of the municipality. And we see that every single day. Even people that are been appointed or not appointed, that has sufficiently the level of skill and capacity, And that particularly, Isabella, for CFOs and municipal managers. The AG's report shows that I think it was a 23-24 report. I don't know the exact number, but certainly we could share that with the listeners and the viewers that a high level of them don't have the necessary qualifications to be able to do that. So this is very important. What we have done is to change the Public Service Amendment Act to ensure that we can cascade that to professionalization and ensure that we do create that separation between politics and the bureaucracy, like we do right now. So it is fundamental. But more important, we've got to fix it as we go along. So we can't wait for those changes. We've got to ensure that we appoint the right CFOs and the right MMs, the right municipal managers or city managers. That is fundamental. We've got to find a way. So another area that we're working on, and I'm sure you're familiar with it because you made input on it, is that you know that the Department of COGT is working on a white paper for local government. That comes out very strong around the recommendations from a policy point of view, that when they do release the white paper for consideration, right, for public comments and for further input for cabinet, that this is going to be an important point, Sabebo. And you've got to enforce that we appoint capable officials that have the right requisite skills and that are able to perform their functions without political favor or without political influence. It's fundamental. That's why we put that as an important reform. And the poor local government officials are crying out for it. I mean, they basically say, please protect us, guys, you know, so this is quite an important part for us.
And of course, it will help towards building a capable.
We need professional. Yeah. 30 years into democracy, I think it was important to develop that capability of people that was there. Yeah. What we do require is a separation. Given the sort of dynamics and the evolution of the political system, we've got to protect the bureaucracy and the ability of the state, right? The functionaries of the state to perform their functions. That's the maturity of a democratic system, right? For us to be able to deliver, come what may, who is got the mandate from the electorate. That's such an important part. The sort of bureaucracy function mustn't come to a standstill because, one political party is this here and the next political party is this way, all these dynamic things. And that's such a nice thing, Dr. Mbava and Isabella. We've done a bit of studies on this. I mean, we sort of had an engagement with the Canadian government. And the Canadian government has democracy for the last 200 years. So we just we juniors. And they still have problems, but they professionalized where they have the head of the public service and they had, appointment process that is very professional around how you want to appoint an undersecretary, which is a DG, right? And these are things that we got to think through how we can better improve the public service, because whether we like it or not, citizens want someone to be there. They want us to be there, because if everything comes to a halt, lo and behold, not like the US, where everything does come to a standstill because of no agreement. We don't have that system. Our system is robust enough. We have a constitution. We have strong laws around continued funding and the delivery of programs. So even if there's a sort of a hiatus or where you negotiate the GNU, delivery and services continue.
It's now continuing here. Giadi, I know you have some thoughts as well we wanted to share.
Yes, thanks. So this touches on what we was been speaking about, especially one of the main challenges that you mentioned, being spatial integration. Obviously it's a big challenge, and it's something that needs attention, but it also kind of speaks to what Sabelo was saying and what we were all saying now about local government reform. So a bit cross-cutting, but in Vulindlela, as far as I understand, the reforms to remove, in terms of spatial integration, removing constraints, facilitating housing development, and part of that is addressing regulatory barriers, if that's correct. Could you speak a bit more about that and this concept of densification, but then also how do we ensure that municipalities sort of implement the broader the broader directional targets that. Just any of your thoughts around that?
Thank you. So the thing about them, let's just quickly deal with this municipal thing. We said in Vulindlela we want to talk with the metros.
Yeah.
For obvious reasons, let's start with the metros. 60% of our population, and probably it's the same for GDP. So it makes a big difference, right? 8 metros. If we add the secondary cities, that's 75 to 80%. That makes it 70. So from a sort of priority point of view, we would love to have targeted all 260 some odd minutes. It's just not possible. So we've got to deal with the economies of scaling where our population is concentrated. The focus from a service delivery point of view that leads to human settlements is the ring fencing of those utilities. It's 2 core utilities. No business, no household. No one can operate if you do not have functional water and electricity services. That's the basic thing. And water, I mean bulk water services, water treatment. Right? It's not just potable water. It's all of that. Electricity the same. Because a dysfunctional municipality that cannot distribute or accommodate the significant energy changes as we shift towards renewables and everything else, you are going to become obsolete, and people will find different ways of trying to do that. So those are important parts of also the professionalization of utilities, ring fencing that. And of course, you're familiar with that in the MTBPS in 2025 to, still in this. 2025, 2026. Oh, I forgot again, we're not in the financial year yet. The minister had announced the Metro Trading Services reform as an incentive, the 54 billion rand to support the ring fencing and professionalizing those utilities. That's fundamental, and it's a strange thing because in the initial parts of when we were implementing much of the local government reform in the early 2000s, this was happening and then it sort of stopped. Right? I mean, City of Johannesburg is a useful example because you formed these utilities, they were entities, they were ring fenced, and then they stopped ring fencing them. So City of like City Power, Johannesburg Water, the JLA, Johannesburg Road Agency, all of them they have separate boards, they have separate CFOs, they have separate corporate governance structure. And we were sort of moving in the direction that this city took a different model. They didn't create entities, they created business units that were ring fenced. And so they have a department of electricity and water, which interestingly is still ring fenced. Right? So they have an ability to show balance sheets of revenues, and they show the expenditure. But the City of Johannesburg is an example that doesn't happen. So how does this work on rental to spatial? Because the way we're designing houses, we still do it, we perpetuate the parket spatial. We're not building in the city centers because building houses for ownership is expensive in the city center. It becomes unaffordable. And what we're doing is the city is a classical city, or continue to build houses on the outskirts of where you work and where you recreate. It is costly for workers to take, a train, kindly Mrs. plane, and do a taxi again, and that's costly services. You got the data of our Ds. So a supply side model that we've adopted, which is building BNG houses, we think we got to turn it around. So what we're trying to introduce and working through with the whole series of experts is developing a demand side model. So demand side model is quite interesting, and demand side model that begins to think through, can we incentivize a rental stock? Right? Because that's quite an interesting thing, and you will think about it, that people want to live in a city center because they work over here, and maybe they can be domestic or garden services, or we do security work. Can I find a house here? No, I can't, right? But I can rent with subsidized. So the question is, so we look at it, right? And you've got the data there, but it's just on absolute numbers, right? So I might be off a little bit. But let's take the 250K that we pay for a housing subsidy. That's the amount that you pay to build a house. Of course, the cost has increased, so the number of our units have declined. I mean, we used to do from 2018 250,000 units at 250K inflation index, but now we're doing less than 70 because the costs have climbed. But if we converted 250,000 for a house that we built that will keep free of charge, can we convert that value into a rental subsidy over the life of a working age addict? Yes. And we can. Right? We can actually. So what would it come to? Again, I'm just working with it. It would come to 2,500, 3,000 rand. Now, let's assume you find a rental accommodation unit's 5,000. If you buy half that rent subsidized, it makes easier for you to live there. So you have secure rent, you're in the city, you densify, and you're able to cut the cost of commuting because you can walk through. And so we've got to expand and think with that model. We haven't really looked at the demand side rental subsidy model. And that's what we put forward center out. And it's really exciting stuff that the Department of Human Settlements have been working on, but never expanded. Because we stuck on the model of building people's houses. I think probably the only place that builds houses for people. And many people that you interact with I just want to serve a site. Tell me how we can do that. Or many of the workers here, can I find a room here somewhere that I can pay cheap for because I don't want to travel and do 3 taxis or 2 trains. And that's the innovation that we think. So we're working together with the private sector, with the Human Settlements Department, and thinking through how we can design this. The private sector is quite, so we think of creating a national fund. And we're housed in a manner where you could put the money into and pay out a rental subsidy to Rudi of the lifespan of his working life, right? And you could do that, and so of course, and then of course what it does, pooled funds in that way has an ability to attract investments and a whole series of other things. It's a complex model, but it has worked elsewhere in the world. And we've actually run it, small scale, by the Human Settlements here in Cape Town, by the way, to think through it. But it just shifts away the side of spatial thinking from home ownership to rental, what people want to do, much more cheaper. They climb up the economic hierarchy and they can provide they can buy, bond the house. But that's not where the market is right now. Many of our citizens are not in that range of bond. We're at that point where many people would rely and would happily take a rental subsidy to reduce the cost of living closer to it. And we think that's the way, right? Now, getting the municipalities to make property available. So we've got a partnership quite strongly with us. So here's the structure. I mean, we can deal with DPWI, right? And say, Department of Public Works, where is your buildings? Do you own this building? So can we create and convert that? And so in the city of Johannesburg, that's important. Much of the property that you can convert is actually owned by the municipality. So the politics at play here, right? Yes. So you got to think about how you can convince municipalities to say, release the land or the property that is. Johannesburg is a good example where there are tons and tons of buildings that are empty. And you can convert them into low-cost rental subsidies, right? And they're beautiful, right? Help people to get close to their places as well.
And they see a value proposition in that proposal, the municipalities, to understand how this can actually change people's lives if they are closer to their work.
I think so. I think they do. I think many of the metros see that as an important part of how they do densification. The question is developers, property owners who have vested interest. That, in the city is quite big, right? Or you're going to build low-income rental stock housing here next to me, right? I think of building it, just think about Maitland the hospital here in Greenwood. That's the political decisions that we've got to push for. That if we want to integrate, we want to develop integrated, densified, we got to push that. We got to get cities to be able to do that. And I think it all comes back to this city, for example, as a way of saying islanders are not doing enough on transformation. And that's going to be the important part about how we get this effects. And I think there is a general interest.
Yes, there is.
On doing that, if it works. They don't want to see themselves paying for that. They want to see how we can use the existing fiscal allocations in a much more better way to support this kind of stuff.
And of course, we have some quite interesting reforms on freight logistics that have happened and the British airports. I thought it is your sector.
So the FFC has previously looked into route productivity, and from reading the report, seems like a lot of positive things that have happened in terms of operational performance of Transnet, bringing private sector participation. But I wanted to ask you, on the other side, we also noticed that there's still some significant delays in the reforms that are happening. So could you shed more light on that in terms of why those are happening, any responses on the private sector side?
Absolutely. I think most of the reforms are probably moving ahead, but maybe slowing down because of some of the challenging stuff that are there. I'm an economist like many of you. I don't understand transactions uncomplicated and bundled. And then you suddenly feel, oh my goodness me, this is really terrible. You got to bring in a whole series of people to be able to manage it. Because you don't want to pass the sudden, you don't want to breach covenants, right? And lenders run for the hill and suddenly demand for their money, then in trouble. You know that. So you've got to manage that. You've got to make sure that you've got to deal with information asymmetry. So those are important things. So it's quite complicated in doing work. I think we've done pretty well on the reform. The reform success is dependent on how much we can invest quite quickly in the state of a network. Your point is correct. So what you've seen over the last 3 or 4 years, we used to move in 2017, 2018 financial year, we moved about 214 billion tons on our network. Last year, 160. The year before, 149. So, that's partly because we have not, and I'll say this quite clearly, part of it is just that capture. The fact that when we were supposed to have done the investments, but we focus on locomotives and wagons, which is important, but we simply delayed the investments in maintenance of the network at some, Perways, tracks, overcables, signaling systems, all these things were neglected. And so you're at a point where you have speed restrictions and you can move only at a particular speed, and then you have derailments. You see that all the time. And therefore volumes are impacted. So we've got to fix the network. How we do that is a question of, a conversation that we're having on the models. We think there are unique ways of doing it. Or we're not going to do this thing that we've done before, where we're going to let SOEs borrow perpetuity and we sign off on that and say, okay, Transnet, you can borrow 220 billion rand to fix an input, and everybody smiles. We've got to think very innovative because we don't have the money. Can the private sector do that? Yes, they can. How can we do that? Well, we can concession some of the lines without selling off ownership. Which are the lines that are important for us? The cash cows are iron ore, manganese, the north, and coke. Right? The chrome, one north, and the one that runs to other parts of Richards Bay, and then the one that runs to RDC. These are the ones. And then, of course, we got to get more trucks off the road because 70% of our container volumes are run on that corridor that runs between City Deep and Durban. If you can ship that volume that was there before under back and forth, that has a significant impact. But you got to fix it. So yeah, concession is a good way, because more recently what we've done is that the minister has now issued a request for information. And we give that because we wanted to understand what is the market response, what is the expression. Because what we do sometimes is we would design these RFPs in a way that also favors incumbents, but also sometimes design it in a way that is not dango. So we have to go back to the drawing board 2 years later. So I think we're spending quite a bit of time, and I think that's maybe the slowness that people are asking for. Why are you taking so long? Well, because if you just rush it along, it's not bankable, then you're going to tell us it's just a rubbish RFP. So we're spending time in designing it so that it is bankable and you can get it there. And that's a way to get it paid for. So if the iron ore line is concessioned, for example, which is one of the RFPs in Dr. Mbava that we're thinking through, you know how concession works. We did it with, we have good examples of Sunrock. The state of our network was terrible. Gave them the N4, gave them the N2, concessioned out the N3, about N1. And we were at the back after 30 years in a state either equal or better. Generally, it's better, right? So those are the way of how we think through how we can fund this, because there's no fiscal space. You as a FCC, there's no space for that.
So now, Rudi, for instance, the Court of Durban, that is one of the busiest, right? They had like container terminals there. At one time, there was a curriculum there. Nothing was moving.
It still is. Dr. Mbava still is. So Pier 2, one success of the work that we've done is, I don't know if there was a court case, but we actually did a PSP for Pier 2. which is where 70% are container volumes. That's the largest container terminal in the whole continent, still is, right? Very inefficiently run, right? Large turnaround times, wet systems. I mean, there were times when there were 10 to 20 kilometers of tracks waiting now to go into the port, right? So what happens, the cradle of the entire Tikuni, city center. No one can move because trucks are standing on a queue, so you got to think on. So what we had agreed with Transit is to put up we designed this PSP differently. It was a strategic equity partner, initially what happened was that went through a competitive bidding process, very clean, very good, and ICTSR, Filipino company, was appointed as the preferred. But and then there was a court case because the losers were saying no, there was unfairness, and eventually the court ruled a few months ago, no, this was fair, clear, do that. And the other bidders who took into court decided, no, we're not going to proceed with that. So that was quite a bit. 1st of January this year, the NUCO was operational, and it's called Durban Gateway and Container, and it's a joint, it's a strategic equity partner where they have 49% and Transit has 51%. They're controlling management share. We're excited, right? Let's see what's going to happen. They do that. It's a 20-year strategic equity partnership. Could have done it differently, but I think this is a good way of trying to figure out whether they can do that. The ICTSI guys are very excited. They sort of operate in a very emerging market kind of context. Lots of ports out in Southeast Asia, lots of ports that they operate, for example, in Latin America, But they kind of understand that they're not an MSC, Maersk, or Shanghai, or, DP World. There's a different sort of, people that have all bid for. So I'm quite excited that is it. And that's a key. The key thing is firstly to get those trucks off the road.
Yes.
And move them onto the corridor. You need proper team to run the NACO line, right? And the problem has been Transit has, and I say this, and the Transit people will maybe not be happy because they see this, but Transit has focused on the cash cows. Tons, it's about moving tons. That's what the rain is about. And where do they get the export and export? Iron ore, massive amounts of that, coal, chrome, and so they focus less on the containers because they just haven't put in a lot of time and effort because that moving tonnage is more important than that. And I suppose they want to refocus on that because as the mine resources deplete, they come to an end. You got to think of where's it there 20, 30 years from now. And there 20, 30 years from now is long distance, container, palletized, automotive. This is the kind of stuff that you got. And you got to have an efficient way of trying to do that. And I mean, I must be honest. Although price is an important part, but when we talk about those who want to, or are shipping their goods from one place to another, it is inefficient. Anything that is bulk is inefficient to do anything longer than 300 kilometers on the border. Yeah, huge, massive insurance costs. So NATCO is proud, right? 600 kilometers. Whatever you want to do, get it onto rail, move it along, but get that line on the It's planned for concession, and there's lots of users because the volumes that been lost over the 5 years is container. It's containers that are basically moved off from rail because a whole series of some series of inefficiencies to road.
So we're getting these private companies now onto our line.
They are. So there's concessions that we will put out, and then there's this technical term which is third-party operators who will compete directly with TFR, Transit Freight Rail, to move goods from A to B. So they're operators. They sort of like they're not responsible for the infrastructure. These concessionaires are responsible for the infrastructure, right? And they support an operator. I want to move. I know from point A to point B. Can I get access to the network, rail access? And so they call third-party operators, right? Because and that's what we've now successfully done. We initially had a pre-process network statement, and network statement is kind of, I describe it as a brochure. It describes the state of the next network, terrible state, It says that quite honestly. And then the most important, it does like I'm talking about. It says the network state is really capable, and it recognizes this and that. So it's a network statement, and in most countries who have the sort of logistics system have a network statement. And the network statement, most important, describes the state of the network, what works, what doesn't. And then it has an access charge. So what is a per kilometer per time? And you can define it in different ways, and there's various formulas and models to be able to do that. But that's the price. That's the most important part. And then you have that document and say, okay, now when are you opening up for slot sales? Because you're buying a slot on it, and then a slot depends on the efficiency, on the timing, and then you apply for slots. It is the third party operator applying for the slot, which is from this point to point B. That operator don't care about I want the network to be in a proper state. I need to move my goods. My job is to move my goods, your goods, as a customer from A to B. And so we've allocated the slots. For the first time ever in our rail network, we've allocated slots on a network state with a relatively high access charge. We'll issue another network statement, just updating the costs and stuff like that. So these guys are busy buying trends, building trends, but they're all complaining. They're saying, we've got to work together with Transnet to fix the state of management, because I come back to that. The success of us moving from road to rail and getting the volumes up, export earnings is fixing the network. We didn't do that. We got locos, we got wagons. We can maintain and fix that. But if you can't move them on the rail network that is broken, then you're in trouble. And so it's nice, Dr. Mbava, is that the private sector, Transnet and ourselves are working together to collectively find ways to pay for it and fix it. Because we can go for a concession, so we still have to design an RFP. Now, goes to market, then how long is it going to take? You got to develop a response time. Then we'll say 6 months. I said, no, give us another 6 months, and then give us another 6 months, please, before they get bankability. And it happens. That's how it is, yeah? And then 2 years have gone past, and the state of the network is still there. So we've got to think in a very creative way how we can fix it immediately as we move to private sector, all those other kind of things, and then contracting and the reinsurance. The most important part, fix the net. And then you got to make sure that the ports are going to work also as well. Because you can pile up a whole series of things in the ports, and then you can't get it out. So that's quite an important integrated system of building the movement of goods from port to port and creating that efficiency. But some exciting stuff in ports. I mean, again, when they nationalized Transnet, this is what we were talking to some people that were around during the apartheid days who did advisory work, who was doing advisory work for us. They nationalized Transnet, of course, in the 70s, right? And this was part of the process that the apartheid government did. None of this was there. And so we're going into a new area of open access, third-party operators, slot sales, network statement, private sector investment, concession. We have never done this before. And we're moving along, and it's very, very exciting.
And I'm sure it's going to bring in some efficiencies as well. So it has to be absolute. Now, what are your thoughts?
Based on what you've been talking about the rail and port. So one of the things is that one of the questions that one would have is that when you open up, rails and ports for private participation, one would ask that then how are you going to ensure lower logistic costs and also improved, service reliability rather than only isolated efficiency gains?
I think the most important part is that we've got to move from regulated pricing. But you got to set the floor, right? That's the problem with regulated pricing. Your work shows that our biggest input costs is regulated pricing. It's administrative pricing, right? So it's what we got to do. The only way you do that is by creating competition. So think about, I always throw an example, think about what we did with telecommunications. We had regulated pricing for telecom. It was the only operator. Then we had mobile networks. And then you had to unbundle telco. But right now, you don't have a regulator that deals with pricing. The market sets on it, right? What the regulator does is set standards for telecommunication. And every single time we do a reform, the price comes down. So I think it's important that we also challenge the misnomer that if we do competitive markets right now, pricing is going to come down. Because you've got vested contracts that you've got to deal with stuff. You've got to think through those kind of stuff. But what it does do is set the footing for electricity, for example. If you create a South African wholesale electricity market and you have a central purchasing agency and you're creating a market conditions, ultimately what you want to buy as a central purchasing agency, which is transmission system operator, is you're going to ask in a market, you're buying a day ahead or week ahead, year ahead markets for people that plan that far ahead. Tell me what you have. I want to buy it on this day or that year or this month, and I want it on the lowest possible price. Well, that's what it is. But then you think about balancing and all the other stuff because you got to think about other technologies. But that's what it is. That's what it has to bring down. Same with rail. It's regulated, right? Except there's no regulated price for rail costs. That's monopoly price, pure monopoly price. And as you know, deadweight loss, inefficiencies priced into the, I don't think sometimes we understand the cross-subsidization that goes into that. So you want to unbundle that tariff, like we are unbundling tariffs for electricity. We want to know what goes into the transmission. What do you pay for moving electrons from A to Z, right, across transmission? We just don't want to know the wholesale tariff for generating that, but we want to know the movement of it also. So you got to do that. But those are important part because you got to deal with information asymmetry where there's been monopolies that they have regulated price, and it's not always clear, right? I mean, you can think about it from a NERSA, which is a good way of thinking. The ports regulator have become a lot more efficient in unpacking, and so we get a sense of what the cost of the port. How do we get the port price, right? Where it's cross-subsidized for rail, or nothing because it's market. So I just said the principle is that the opening up those markets, creating competition in there, ultimately see that in very other sectors like telecommunications brings down the price. We just got to ensure, and that's why I came to the point about this Dr. Mbava. You got to make sure that we got to create level playing fields. You got to make sure that all market participants feel that it's fair. That you got to make sure that we manage and deal with incumbent and the sort of kind of ring of monopoly. It's not necessarily going to mean that the incumbent is not going to dominate the market in the next one. Those incumbents are going to dominate the market for 10, 15 years. But you've got to create the market conditions and show that there's a level playing field. And if private sector can see investments, including the incumbents, because they also have to think about these guys eating their lunch. In both of these things, they actually won't eat their lunch. To be frank, Dr. Mbava. I mean, think about the minister set a target for rail volumes, 250 million tons. Transit is moving 170 now. There's a lot of lunch. There's still a whole 130 million tons and more for everybody. So you could introduce that efficiency. Electricity is the same thing. We know that when we create competition, we no longer see we don't see the link to growth and electricity. So you see electricity consumption produced by Eskom decline. So people are moving off. But you got to bring down the price. Once you bring down the price, you'll see that there's an uptick in that. And we see that in the Indian markets, for example. When India did this, I mean, India is a good example, Dr. Mbava. They also stuck in the low growth for many years in the 90s. And it was the late 90s and early 2000s, they took a decision to reform what we do. And they also unbundled their network sectors, energy, logistics, right? And single, vertically integrated. And we looked at the data, right? And you can see the price of electricity from 2005 to 2008, from $200 per megawatt hour, right? That's 20 US cents per kilowatt hour, being converted easily into rats, to under $60 a megawatt hour over 3 years. So it's by bringing the cost. And then, incumbents say, yeah, but you'll take all our customers. In actual fact, what we see, both private generators and the utility, the incumbent, we see increasing demand of sets, 7% increase in demand of sets. The same thing where they saw declining sets and people moving off. So it's not true. For either one of those big sectors, we've got to unlock energy and logistics. That competition is going to destroy it. There's not going to be dominant players, but competition is important for price, for efficiency. We know that from our own work. And it is important for us to get the volumes growing. And, of course, income and growth for the country. Ultimately, that's what it's about.
But why is electricity still so expensive for the men on the street? I mean, going to inspire to buy electricity. Pay so much.
Yeah, I mean, This is the point. So think about right now. So I will have to work. So what was the wholesale prior the sort of household tariff that we paid was 212 cents a kilowatt hour, right? Now NERSA has agreed on 8%, so you got to put in 8%. Then you got to put on the average slap on from the municipal 15%. So now you're looking at closer to 3 rand something a kilowatt hour. So it's just underneath that. It's unaffordable. It is unaffordable for business. It is unaffordable for ordinary households. What's the unintended consequences? People steal. Illegal connections. Or those who are Wi-Fi and middle class, we move all the grid. Right? And it becomes self-sufficient. Now, you don't want people to steal, but you also want self-sufficiency. You want to create a market where everybody can participate. Because even with households that for example, produce and businesses, maybe this building runs on a off the grid solution and has self-reliance, you can sell it back into the grid. So you can add a feed-in tariff, for example, and creates efficiency and balancing. The city can do that, and in fact, the city does that. They've limited it though because they don't have all the resources. But you could develop a system where it incentivizes you to produce electricity for your own consumption, and when you go home at 5 o'clock, you still have quite a bit of electricity. You can sell it back into the municipal system. In that way, you bring down the cost, because that's an important part. There's no other way. The regulated pricing is not going to bring down the cost. And this is the problem. We got to think about. Transitioning from vested contracts, the regulated pricing, to a competitive market that you got to bring down the true cost. Now, when you bring down the costs, it's about efficiency. So you got to think about, my future, right? I've got to think about how am I going to become efficient, because my cost structure is not designed for a competitive market where others may have fewer people employed or all series of some other things that are. But our economy is being staggered by high electricity costs. Yes, and we're becoming more and more competitive. And I can give tons of examples. Let me just give the one classical one that I was working on, which was on the ferroalloy sector. We have 70% of the manganese reserves. We have 80% of chrome reserves. Guess what? We can't smelt them anymore. We used to be the only ones that smelted, and basically it's a ferro because you add it to other steels to make stainless steel, for example, or specialized forms of steel. We're the only ones that does it. We can't do that if we're selling it at 212 cents a kilowatt hour for ferrostone, which is extremely electricity intensive. So guess what? We get priced out because we don't have competitive electricity pricing, and China basically takes all our manganese, all our chrome, they smelt it and they buy the pan and right? So from having a competitive advantage of being the only supplier that can do ferrochrome or ferroalloys, we now buy back from China because we become completely competitive. And so what does it do? It also has another knock-on effect. Industrial capacity or industrial development is based on steel and production. That's our economy, right? And once you see that decline of the industrial capacity, then you'll become like the US economy. And then unfortunately people want to think, okay, we're going to get iPhones to be produced. Just really, right? See, you could talk about yeah. So you just say, don't worry, we'll do beneficiation.
Yes.
Once that passes us, it's very difficult to get it back. So we still have an opportunity to see what we can do. And we can't give them subsidized price. Someone has to pay that cost. If you give them a special tariff arrangement, let's just say the steel sector, who pays for that? Eskom can't pay for that, and Eskom won't. So what are they going to do? Can we pass it through the tariff or the regulatory clearing account? Or another option is, Treasury, can you pay for us that subsidy? No, we don't have money. So, okay, then we're back to, a X value that is uncompetitive for you to sell your fair products to the world market. So we got to bring down the price, and the way we got to think through is market mechanisms, in my view, to do that. And we've got good examples of it. Our telecommunications is a good example. No one can tell us anything else. Lots of even me, when I was in the union, Dr. Mbava, I was opposed to that Telkom deal, right? And of course, remember in the 90s, some of us were a bit older, but we didn't think that telecom, we didn't think that mobility or mobile telephone would be as it is right now.
Yeah.
We were still on fixed line. My mother's the only one that still has a fixed line, right? I suspect. I don't know who else has fixed lines there. Our was all a fixed line still, right? I don't know how to handle it. But if you think about the evolution of the technology, like energy, for example, we didn't think that we could do solar PV, concentrated PV, wind, battery storage. It was not there, right? The cost was prohibitively high. Today, we can think of hybrid systems where we can have battery technology and have run wind and PV during those times that we need them and save them on battery. It's just, that's the technology, and so you've got to move along with that. The telecommunications is a good example. And all we got to do is, how do we get cheaper telecommunications to ordinary people? That's what it is, bringing down data costs. And every single reform we've got to do, and we do it, we've done that. So those who complain like me about, you're privatizing telecom. Oh no, we do. Okay, we did a little bit. We sold off a stake. We still have a bit of stake in there. But, it opened us technology. And now you have a competitive market. We got to bring down the price some more. But that's a good example of what you talk about, a network sector.
Yeah. So no. Sabir, again, the follow-up question, or comment, but thoughts?
Yes, I do, Dr. Mbava, particularly on the reforms within the electricity. We spoke about distribution, spoke about transmission, spoke about generation. Those are three key processes. And then, but when I read the document, you see, it looks like the distribution lags behind in terms of reforms when you compare to generation and transmission. Why is that happening, and what could be done to make sure that it catches up with these other two?
It's a tricky one. It does lag. That's why it flags it as an orange, right? I don't know if you remember, we tried, when we did the electricity reforms in the 2000s, we didn't start off with unbundling and separation of transmission and generation. We started with EDR, electricity distribution industry. I don't know if you recall, Sabella, we had this conversation about rates, usually electricity distributors, and we were forming that. Lots of, I thought it was maybe the wrong place to start, because you needed to get all those hundreds of distributors and Eskom to agree on it. And eventually I think there was political will, in my view, lack of political will, but also distributors wanting to buy into it. So we got to be careful. So we started with unbundling of the transmission. We also thought that's an important part, given that we were crisis or load shedding in insecurity and being under press. The distribution is an important part. So we're taking it slightly slower. The minister, for example, has introduced distribution agency agreements, the DAA. And that's partly to lock in municipalities that need technical support and capacity around service delivery. But part of it is the incentive to pay over your accounts. What you collect from citizens paid over to Eskom. So that's an important part. Ultimately, the road that we have to follow through is to think through how we fundamentally transform ring fencing, like I said, for distributors at municipalities, because that's where the biggest thing. And then we got to think about, but NERSA a few weeks ago introduced, they never did it before. But remember, NERSA has to give you a license. You have to comply with the license. We know that, and I say this, a large chunk of it, more than 50% don't comply with licensing conditions. So then we introduce rules that says we are actually going to penalize you if you don't comply with the licensing conditions. So that's quite an interesting thing that they've started doing that. The point is they require capacity to do that. So that's the first step. But ultimately, you've got to think about the long-term reform. Is 167 distributors the economies of scale that you have for a country of our size? We're a small country. We have, 70 million people, right? Do you think that you need a distributor in 3 or 4 municipalities or 5 municipalities in Northern Cape, where that similar services could simply be extended by a metro municipality that has a distributor? And so you got to think about that. Or can Eskom do that? You got to think about the city in a way. But again, There's also interest, and you got to think through again. We can't simply do like we do for wholesale, where this is the utility and the shareholder is the state. In this instance, the utility at the municipal level is owned by the municipality, whereas constitutional powers and provisions are not owned directly by us in national government. Got to think through how we deal with intergovernmental relations and manage that. And we got to create incentives, and there's incentives, carrots and sticks. You know that. You're good at writing those things for us. So. And the AG has been quite, Dr. Mbava, the AG has been quite useful in thinking through that. That's why I said to you, the white paper is such an important part of this. So you've got to move all these pieces. The ring-fencing, metro trading services reform, the work that nurses does around capacitating inside and enforcing licensing conditions, the white paper as well. It's an overhaul of the system that has to make local government function much better.
Yeah.
Or no?
Yeah. Gianni, your thoughts?
So Rudi, I actually had a thought on the water and sanitation side of things. And I was looking at the progress that was made on the National Water Resource Infrastructure Agency. My first thought was, this is now a new a new entity. Is there this how you form EU entities? Say now risk of further fragmentation, but then I was looking into it and correct me if I'm wrong, it's actually consolidating some of the functions.
Absolutely. Let's take TCTA, for example.
Yes.
Into that. And many of the other water entities at the wholesale level, at the bulk level, into a single entity.
Okay.
And TCTA had a limited mandate.
Okay.
So it's partly running your bulk water infrastructure agency, going to the market, being able to do what TCTA did for bulk water projects, securing water resources, and managing price and water pricing at the bulk level. They've not been good at that. And I think this is what Sean the DG of Water and Sanitation has been doing. That's not the problem. The problem is distribution again, right? Yeah. So that's the thing. And the presidency, I hear you guys on this water stuff. I know you're sorting out top, but that's not the problem, guys. How do we fix water services and your distribution layer? I'll come to that. But you're right. It is about that. But we think that the rest perform new Jesus there, but you think the infrastructure agency is one thing that we needed many years ago, right? And we think it's useful to be able to get the right expertise in. Yes. And generally, TCTA has are quite efficient, like good.
Yes.
So they've been able to go to the market, borrow money. They've been able to do good planning systems, work through on the Lusita Highlands, work through on some of the other big projects. And that, I think, is a useful thing. It takes into that experience, but more to better coordinate the point and not destroy.
That's how I understand, but it not sort of strengthen the financing component.
That's about really what it is.
Yes.
So that there's a much more stronger balance sheet.
Yeah.
It's able to work much more closely and locking in private sector investments into these big projects, like in Kumas, for example, and think through that as a really good or some of the other ones. But that's what it is. It's about how do we use our ability to strengthen a part of private sector in building into bulk
Automation.
Absolutely.
Streamlining.
Spot on, yeah. But the distribution is the problem. So there's there's interesting changes there. Because unlike energy that has a regulator, we've got a complex system for water. You have water service providers and water service authorities. And sometimes they're all in the same place, but they're distinct, right? Water Services Authority gives power to a water service provider, right? It's the one that does that. Who manages them? It isn't any law. In actual fact, this is the interesting thing, because you had a nurse of electricity. NERSA is quite clear. You've got to apply for your license conditions, and these are the license conditions, and you can take it away any point in time. So they're strengthening that. It's nothing like that. So the Water Services Act that is currently before Parliament is precisely to introduce that. To give authority and power to the National Department, and you've got to think about where that lies, to both the Water Services Authority that will give a sort of conditions for a water service provider to trade and meet those conditions. What are those conditions? Blue drop, green drop, no drop. That's simple. Quality of standard, service delivery, make sure you maintain if you want to be a water service provider. So that's strengthening the system that's there, and making sure that the Department of Water and Sanitation has a better say and roll around that. That's hopefully we can do that. And we see some of the successes in the system of, since we lost the blue drop, green drop reports, right, and got it back again since 2014. That tracks and says to us the quality of the water. Because without that system, we just couldn't determine with the quality of water. And you saw that. And guys, you saw that. People complaining about the quality of water not meeting the standards. Those are the most important, most basic standards. And publicizing it by telling us the quality of our water from the distributors, water service providers are.
Yeah. So as we're going to close now, I just want to give Fabrice one chance to maybe comment. I know he had some comments on renewable energy, and then it's going to be Neo, and then we're going to close it.
Yeah. I think on the renewable energy side, I think you mentioned a lot of investments going there. So in your view, South Africa's heavy industries, how do you see their structural adaptability to transitioning towards renewable energy?
They've adopted it. Surprisingly, so the driver of the renewable energy investing, that 390 billion rand worth of investment driven by mining. Big chunk of that is mining, retail, some manufacturing, which is not continuous. But that's what they've done. They've diversified and reduced the cost of mining. So we track, you saw in the report, we track about 204 projects. We started this as a partnership with the Minerals Council, because when we did the Schedule 2 change in 2022, we realized that it's okay to register your projects, but there was a whole series of blockages to get to a registration. ATEP, water use licenses were inefficient. EIA is crazy. I can give a very long list, startup 7 and 15, depending on where you build, even somewhere else. And we actually designed a energy one-stop shop for that, which we want to now utilize to sort of get into other systems. This was a useful way of trying to do that. So we're trying to digitize and integrate that. But that's 204 projects, 24 gigawatts of energy. So if you're taking store capacity, which is about 40 or 41 gigawatts that we have, or rather I would say, let's take any given good day that Eskom generates 35,000 megawatts. It's quite close. That's 2/3 of the total generation capacity. Of course, it's not coal-based, but it has a lot of hybrid projects. Batteries included now more and more. But you have 24,000 gigawatts of projects that we track. And that's driven by industry. No one else is going to do that because you got to build on the basis of having an offtake. There's another data set which is quite an interesting one. The Wind Association and the Employee Association for Photovoltaic, Dr. Mbava, they've been having surveys on projects in development. I don't know what it means yet, but I suppose that's people that have decided to develop the projects. And when they first started out, they do a survey, and they had determined that the projects in development was first in 2023 was about 60 gigawatts. 2024 was 130 gigawatts. 2025, 242 gigawatts of projects in development. So now, that's not the skin of China or India, all right? They do that in 1 month, right? China does that in 1 month, right? Or builds 12,000 kilometers of lines in the quarter, right? We're talking about 12,000 over 10 years, right? But that's the sort of scale where we can pivot ourselves as the leading manufacturer, localization, infrastructure for clean energy production of renewables. Because that scale allows us to a whole series of different. We were doing this on small scale RIP programs. Right? When you compare the sort of 2,000, 3,000 or 5,000 megawatts for RIP, we're doing it now at times 5, right, per year. And that's the kind of scale that we talk about. And so I think this is a useful opportunity for us to pivot ourselves as a generator and as a manufacturer of green technology in Africa. And the opportunities is, and that I think is a useful. Guess what? It's not driven by Eskom. It's driven by the private sector. That's the nicest part about that. And they all want to reduce their costs.
Exactly. Neil, your final thoughts?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Rudi, I'll take you to the ground level now. Surely there should be someone in Johannesburg, right? Johannesburg, particularly Midrand and other areas in Johannesburg, sitting and watching, will watch the podcast and say the word reform surely means things are changing, and things are going for the better good. But however, in their current state, they will say we don't have water. Like there are these reforms that are being implemented. Then what would be your word against that? What is the actual, according to your own word, what is the root cause of water shortages and cuts in Johannesburg?
That's another podcast, right? But certainly is about the conversation we had about local government. There's lots of things that we must do and focus on the city of Johannesburg. The president had announced an intervention. We did something similar in eThekwini, turned it around, right? And a lot of work to be done. But we got tourism figures back again to the pre-COVID levels. We've done a lot of work on that. Kumars has gone back out. We're fixing Umlazi Canal, for example, and a whole series of other things that are big. Johannesburg is not that far. Water is a primary thing that we require to do. I suppose maybe the president will announce some of these things in the State of the Nation address. But the mention in Johannesburg is something that we have announced and we've done. We're not moving as fast as we like. But certainly, I think that I'm a resident of Johannesburg. I don't have water on some days, like on weekends. Like I know, I'm planning for water outages on the weekends. And there's a lot of, and we know what we need to do. We just really know what we need to do. We got to fix, maintain the pipes. We got to repair the reservoirs. We got to get the pumping stations working. We got to ensure that we do the maintenance and the infrastructure to be able to do that. Johannesburg Water is one of the first utilities that we want to ring fence to be able to do that. There's a committed staff and CEO over there wanting to address that. We got to give them the sort of resources and support to be able to do that. They have a ring fence budget and say, if I want 10 billion rand and I collect 12 billion rand from residents for water, I want 10 billion rand to go to capex and maintenance or to ULES. That's what it means. And so we got to get that right. We got to ensure that does happen. And for me, it's no quick answer to satisfy the residents in Midrand or on the West Rand or any other residents out in Orange Farm or anyone else. But it is an important part of us to be able to work towards fixing that and working with the city to do that.
Well, there you have it. You heard it from the horse's mouth. The head of Project Vulindlela, Rudi Dicks. He explained, gave us insights, the nuances, the challenges, the bottlenecks, and what needs to be done to move our country forward. We heard that there's great progress being done. And of course, there's still challenges, but we are working on them. But thank you so much for joining us. I hope this has been a very insightful conversation for you and that you have learned a lot. Please do follow us on YouTube, on LinkedIn, as well as on X, the Financial and Fiscal Commission Fiscal Matters podcast. Thank you so much.